Hey guys, welcome to the next section of After Effects training. Today we're going to talk about camera movements, camera tools, using them in 3D space. I'm going to start out, I'm just going to make two text layers. We're going to do text 1, and I'll slide this over, and I'll duplicate it by Apple D or Control D. I'm going to make this text 2. I'm going to turn both motion blur on for the comp and the layers and turn 3D on. Cameras, when you're using cameras, if you don't have 3D turned on for the layer, the camera essentially cannot see any layers that do not have 3D turned on. So if 3D is not checked, it's essentially invisible to a camera. It might show up in the 2D plane, but when your camera's moving around, it's not gonna move. So we've got our two text layers. I'm going to shift one of these back in Z space. We'll go back quite a bit. So we have text 1 closer to us, text two further away. If I click on my active camera, I can select custom view here, and I can see that my text 1 is here. If I zoom out, my text 2 is way back here. If I bring it back in Z space, you can see this moving back in Z space. So back to my camera. This says active camera. Active camera just defaults to front if there's no camera. So this is really the same as front. There's no real difference, I don't think. Maybe there is, I don't know. It's just a default as if you have a camera that you didn't adjust at all. So I'm going to create a new camera. When you create a new camera, you get this fun dialog box. There are some options here that you can set up when you create it. You can set your focal length. So 15 millimeters would be like a very wide angle lens. 200 millimeters would be a very zoomed focal length, very close up. 35 is kind of the default. It's not really wide. It's not really zoomed. It's kind of like, as if you're looking at something with your eyeballs. We can adjust our film size, our angle of view, stuff like that. We can turn on depth of field. I kind of just like to leave this as default. I select 35 millimeter, and then I go back and edit that stuff later. So we have our new camera here. I'm going to arrow down. We have our transform properties for our camera. We get a new transform property within camera for that layer, which is point of interest. If I go to back to my custom view, you can see my camera over here. It's kind of hard to see. But if I click on my camera, this little crosshair right here is my point of interest. So if I click and move this around, you can see down here that my point of interest is actually shifting around with it. So that's what our point of interest means. When you orbit around something, this is going to stay locked onto it. So if I move like my position, but not my point of interest stays there on my target, but I can kind of arc around a text layer or something like that. So if you want the whole camera to move with the point of interest, there's kind of certain ways you want to do that. So we have point of interest. We still have our position, orientation, and then our rotations, which is fine. If we rotate our whole camera, like on a y-axis, that'll rotate our point of interest as well. But there's kind of better ways to do it. So this is full rotation X, Y, Z of our camera, which is kind of nice. Same thing with orientation. We can rotate our camera. So that's cool. We have new transform properties. If I arrow down into camera options, we have lots of fun options for our camera. We have zoom, depth of field, focal distance, aperture, blur level, and then iris shape to highlight saturation. These options here, honestly, you're better off, unless you get really in depth. Those are kind of more advanced settings. I rarely use them. I always think what we have is kind of fine. So, you can play with them if you want, but for this lesson, we're really going to focus on zoom, depth of field, focal distance, aperture, and blur level. So I'm going to go back, get out of my custom view, go into active camera, and we'll see what all of this means. So right now, my zoom is really set based off of, if I double click my camera, this 35 millimeter preset, right? So if I change this preset, that changes that zoom level. If I go to 15, you can see it changes it to 800 pixels. If I go back to 35, now I'm at 1866.7. So that's where that comes from. Those presets essentially just give you this value of what about a 35 millimeter camera would mean. Depth of field is on. Even though it's kind of hard to tell right now, there is some depth. If I go back to my custom view and look at my camera, and we adjust our focal distance, you can see that this moving box is where our camera is focused on. So right now it's focused on text 1, text 2 being way back here, which we can't really see. I'm just going to zoom out on here so we can see everything. So text 2 being far back, you can tell that if we move this focal distance, we should be focused on text 1. This should be out of focus. If I go back to my active camera, actually I'm just going to split these views. I'm going to do two views. I'm going to do one, we can do this as a top view, that's fine. So my camera is here, my first text layer is here, my second text layer is way back here. I'm actually going to move this a little bit closer so it's not so crazy. So this is going to be my top view. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see everything. Camera, layer, layer. Over here is what my camera is going to be seeing. So increase this so we can see a little bit better. So text 2, if you look at it full screen, it's actually out of focus right now. It's kind of hard to tell because it's not very out of focus. The way we can increase our depth of field is by increasing our aperture, right? So if I increase my aperture, you can see text 2 begins to kind of become out of focus here. So increasing our aperture will increase that depth. It'll make things more out of focus that aren't aligned with our focal length here. So if I adjust my focal distance to align with this text layer up here, you can kind of see it align with it there. Now text 2 is in focus, text 1 is out of focus. So I'm going to set this back to where we were, bring this back down. There we go. So now text 1 is in focus. Blur level, you can increase your blur even more if you want to increase your blur level. I kind of just leave that at 100% and I set my aperture to something that I like the depth of. But it's kind of nice. This layer back here, if I move this further back in Z space, it'll be more blurred out, right? If I move this closer in Z space, it won't be as blurry. So it's kind of nice when things fly by. If something's in the foreground here of my camera, you can see it's out of focus. If I move it behind our subject, it gets more out of focus the further it is behind, just like a real camera, which is kind of fun. So we've got our zoom, which all these are obviously fully animatable. So I don't even know if that's a word. You can animate all of these. So we have zoom, depth of field, kind of gone over that, focal distance, gone over that, aperture, blur level, we're good, right? So we've gone over all the main settings of our camera. So let's say we want this camera to do a crash zoom in, and then rack focus to text 2. We'll just do a quick animation like that. So that's gonna play with my zoom. That's gonna play with my focal distance, my focus distance. So I want my focal distance to be on this layer, and I want my zoom to start here. And let's see, in half a second, I want it to zoom in. So I'll zoom in on these two, right? And then once it's zoomed in, I haven't really done any focal distance animating yet, so I'm going to get rid of that. Once it zooms in, I want it to change my focal distance. So I'm going to create a keyframe of focus distance, go forward in time a little bit, maybe a half second, and then I'll adjust this to go to my back layer. And we're good. So now our animation zooms in, changes focus. Okay, really basic stuff, but you can do a lot with just these 5 settings here. So let's talk a little bit about movement. If I want my camera to move around, we have a lot of different tools to move it. You can use your transform properties, your point of interest, your position, orientation, rotations to move your camera, but I'm going to get rid of text 2 and center text 1 here. But as a few people pointed out, it's kind of hard to use. It doesn't feel like it's kind of limiting, right? So if I want to, let's say, do a full 360 rotation around this layer, it's kind of hard to do that, right? I mean, I might create a keyframe here on position. My point of interest will always stay in the middle, so that's kind of easy. But honestly, it's kind of hard to do a full nice arcing rotation. So how do we do that? Well, we have my camera looking at my subject here. We'll go forward in time. I created a keyframe there. And there's no way to like do a 360 arc animation. You kind of have to do it in pieces. So if I take my position and I bring it to the other side. So essentially we're going straight forward through it at this point, right? My focal, or my target, my point of interest stays on here. We're not animating that, so this will stay here no matter where my camera goes. But we can bring it to this side, and then essentially we can bring it back, because we know halfway through is going to be up here, the other half is down here. So if I bring this back to its original position, I can reset this. Now we're back where we started. So really we have, it flies through it and then flies back, right? So if we look at that animation, it's just a straight line. Well, we want this to be a circle. And the way we can do that is whenever you animate and have a layer selected, and that layer has some movement animation, like when we select position here, we get this little box right here, right? And we can Bezier these lines to arc this camera out, right? So if I take this and I bring it out to the side at like maybe like a 45-degree angle or whatever, I can kind of arc this camera around. If we go back up here, then we should have an arc up here as well if we click on this keyframe. Oops. Sometimes it gets kind of honky. Maybe it won't let us do that up there. If I easy ease my beginning and end, will that make a difference? But you can see it's starting to get this arcing look now where it's coming around. It's just not far enough. We want this to be, so right now our keyframe interpolation, you click on this, if you notice when I clicked on that, we didn't have those lines to pull out, these boxes like we did down here. Right, I can't smooth this out into a more rounded animation. So I think if we click on this keyframe and go to keyframe interpolation, this could be wrong, and change my temporal to Bezier. Nope, that didn't work. Let's do my spatial interpolation. Does that work? No, that doesn't work. Is it rove across time? No, that doesn't work. Man, why? I don't know why this happens. Keyframe velocity? Continuous? No. Easies? No. So why does it give us that here? Now it's there. Is it just hidden? What's the deal here? Oh, it's just right on top of it. Okay, so that's why. I don't even know. How do I pull them out then? Okay, let's do this. Let's adjust this to bring it out. See, this is the annoying parts of After Effects. Now let's just do this. Okay, so I pulled it out. I'm gonna bring this. These are my starting and ending keyframes. I'll stack these back on top of each other here. So now I have these two that I can play with. So I'm gonna try to kind of create a circle animation. So if I bring these back down here, we just want to form a circle. That's kind of an oval, so I'll stretch these out even further. This isn't perfect. We have to spend a little bit more time to get this perfect. But that's close enough. So now if I look at this, now we're completely arcing around this. You might say, well, why wouldn't we just rotate this text? Well, if we have other stuff in this scene, you know, that we want it to really be a camera move, then that would be why. But we have to do it this way because there's no way, you know, when you rotate, like before when we had rotation as a parameter, we could set the amount of rotations, right? This is 8 rotations around. Well, there's no way to really do that here. We're changing the position value of this guy. So it's kind of tough and confusing, and there's other ways to do it, little more advanced ways, but this is a very basic sense of getting a camera to move while only animating position, right? So let's kind of talk about another way to animate. I'm going to get rid of these keyframes. We're going to go back. A little bit easier way to animate, I'm going to zoom in here so we can see this a little bit closer. animate camera movement is using these camera tools up here. If we left click and hold, we have 4 camera tools: unified camera tool, orbit camera tool, track XY, and track Z, right? So if we know we want a camera movement using these guys, these are always affecting our point of interest and our position. So if I create some keyframes here, and I go forward in time, any movement now I use with these is going to create new keyframes at this point in time. So we have an orbit tool, so you can orbit around an object. This kind of swings it around in that 360, right? Well, you may say, well, that's kind of what we want. That's that 360 look. So you could orbit it around here at one point, and that looks good. You think that, like, you see in this part of the screen that this is what the move's going to be like, but you can see over here that it's not. It's just going to be a straight line forward, right? So you got to think of it as how you're moving in your camera viewer isn't necessarily going to be the movement of your camera. You also have to look at what's going on over here in your camera move. So when I set this, I'm going to go back and undo it, so we're just at our point. If I do this animation where it swings around to the back, you can see it's actually just a straight line. So when I go back and watch through this, it's just a straightforward line, and you're like, well, that's not at all what I did. Well, you have to look at it over here. That's why we had to grab these guys and bring them out, right? That's why we had to do that. Now we're arcing that move around, right? So you can see how it's affecting that. So when you're animating cameras, I highly recommend using this 2-view look. That way you can see exactly what path your camera is going in. So camera orbit's really cool. I really like that. And let's play with track now. Track is up, down, left, right. Track X and Y here. Up, down, left, right. So if I want to slide my camera to the left, you can see it's sliding the camera position, and it's also sliding the point of interest here. So my point of interest is also being changed, which is kind of nice. When we were orbiting, the point of interest actually was not being changed at all, right? So if I grab back my orbit tool and you pay attention to point of interest down here, that's not moving. It's always staying center. So that's good to know as well. Lastly, track Z is just in and out, forward and back. So unified kind of works differently based on which computer you're using. For me, when I use my unified, my left click is an orbit, and I can orbit 360 up, down, left, right, just like the orbit tool does. If I right click and use it, that truck's in and out. And then if I middle mouse click, it does track XY. So that may not be the case for you. That's why we didn't talk about it in class. For sometimes it only orients the camera, so it's like you're looking around. It doesn't actually move. It just adjusts the point of interest. It really depends on how the computer's set up. We're not really going to get into point of interest stuff, so it's like we really focused on these. So orbit, track X, Y, and Z, really they can get a ton done for you, but it's really important when you're doing that to also look over here at exactly what your camera's doing in that movement. So it's kind of cool. I don't know if we've talked about it before, but any movement when you're outside of this active camera view and you're in these like top, left, right views that you see here, we're on top, right? You can see this movement like from a top view. So we know our camera's sliding this way down this line, right? That's our move, right? So very helpful, especially when you're working with cameras. So let's go create a new composition. We're gonna do this jungle scene that we did in class. I got some plants here, and I've got a jungle background. We're gonna do a little slide through a little jungle scene. So I'm gonna bring on my jungle background. I'm just gonna rename this. Oops. I'm going to rename this background. And I'm going to bring on my plants, and I'm going to put those on top of my background, and I'm going to turn them all on 3D. I'm going to turn all motion blur on, and I'm going to turn motion blur on here. Really quick, if you have multiple items, you can left click and drag down, and it'll enable it for all your layers. Just a quick tip. So, so we have our plants and our background are all stacked on this layer here. Some of you in class were saying, how come I can't see my plants? Well, when they're all stacked exactly on the same Z space, it defaults to your hierarchy over here. So if your plants are under your background, you're going to see your background first. But when we pull them out of this space in Z space, that won't matter anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new camera. I'm going to do we'll do a 35 millimeter camera. That works. So now my view over here defaults to my 35 millimeter camera. It says active camera. It's also camera 1, same thing. And I'm going to start pulling these plants apart in Z space. So I'm going to pull them, my camera's here, I'm going to pull them much closer to my camera. And I'm going to kind of slide them over. I'm going to select another one. I'm going to move this in Z space. I'm just going to kind of separate these in Z space. So they're at all kind of different areas, right? So if we look on this side, it's kind of a mishmash, which kind of looks pretty messy right now. But now we can kind of organize them with how we would want them to look. So if this layer is the first layer on the left, I'll kind of put this in the corner. And I might even bring that a little bit closer. And I might rotate it here, give it some Y rotation. Some Z rotation, I'm sorry. I kind of want to create a frame with it on the bottom left. Okay, that's neat. Let's line up this top one. I might rotate this guy as well. Just kind of angle how I want it. That size looks fine. We'll pay attention to this guy here. Actually, let's bring this, kind of separate these a little bit further. I'm going to put this guy in the middle of these two layers. So let's focus on this one. Let's bring this down. What does this one look like? It's like a long, weird, grovey thing. Let's rotate that so it's kind of frames that as well. So we'll do it like that. Looks cool. And this last one, this guy here, it's kind of hard to see. It's this one in the corner. We'll rotate this as well. So I'm kind of just framing everything around this camera, keeping it out of the camera view. So my camera's going to start back here, and I'm going to have my camera push through these items when they come through camera. So I might have to adjust them, but that's a good starting point. I'm going to bring these all down so I can focus on them. And I'm going to go back to my one view here, my active camera. That way we can see this a little bit better. So we've got our comp, a rough start, right? I'm going to create a little bit more depth with this background. If we go to the top view, it's kind of close to these objects here. I'm going to grab this and move it back so it's kind of a further away background here. We'll go back to the active camera, and now it's not big enough, so I need to scale it up. So let's scale this up. Looks good. Okay, so we've got our camera. We've got some leaves and stuff roughly placed. Let's create a text layer. We'll just call it jungle. Looks good. I will make it 3D, turn on motion blur, put it in front of my plants, and I will kind of adjust my size here. Okay, looks good. If I go back to my custom view, actually I'll do top. Kind of want this to be behind those a little bit, so I'm going to bring that about here. So my camera, if I arrow down my options here, go to camera options, my depth of field's turned on, and my focal distance right now is a little shy of where this guy is, right? But while I'm moving my camera, that's going to move along with it because I'm not adjusting. My focal length is fixed. So that might be something we want to animate as this move starts. So let's kind of ignore depth of field for now, and let's just get my camera moved down. So let's go to active camera. We've got my camera as the starting point here. So I'm going to go to, I'm going to use my tools up here to do it. So track Z is what I'm going to use. I'm going to create keyframes on position and point of interest because that's what these all adjust, position and point of interest. So no matter what I'm doing, I always just create both keyframes. I'll do like a 3-second truck in on jungle here. Okay, pretty cool, right? Really quick, just because it's gonna get annoying. Let's make jungle look a little bit better here. I'm gonna put a ramp on this. On CC, it's gradient ramp, I think. But let's make this look a little bit better. Let's give this like a orangey yellow look. I'm going to copy both on the ramp, and I'm going to bring, these are my start and ending points of my ramp. I'm just going to make this maybe a little bit darker, this one a little bit lighter. And that looks good. I'm also going to do a bevel alpha. This creates a bevel on the text, so it gives it a little bit of light, like a light's hitting it, which is kind of nice. Okay, decent starting point. Well, that looks a little bit better at least. So let's go back now that we have our camera move. We just have a very chilled out camera move. Notice point of interest, when I did that move, point of interest actually didn't create a keyframe here when I did that move. That's because it's just followed along with it. So it didn't animate that, so I can just turn that off. We're just going to be playing with position, which is fine. So here's the move, right? Let's see if I can even start a little bit further back. Yeah, what if we start about there? That's kind of fun. So that's what our camera move's going to do. So now let's take a look at depth. Everything, for the most part now, there is some depth. It's just not, oops, it's just not exactly where I would want it to be. I want it to be just a crazy amount of depth. So let's arrow down, go into the camera options, and if you remember, aperture is what determines the depth here. So if I crank this up to about there, that's 105. Now when this comes across, it gets pretty cool. So let's look at the top view and see exactly what's going on here. The focal distance is where this pink line ends, right? So if I look, my focal distance starts with, oops, with nothing really perfectly in focus. My focal length ends just after my last leaf layer here. And where it ends is past my jungle layer. So there's a couple ways we could do this. We could set the focal distance to the ending point of where that jungle text layer is, which is right here. So it's everything starts, you know, relatively out of focus, and as it moves in, I'll go back to my active camera. As it moves in and finishes its move, jungle becomes in frame or in focus. I'm just gonna do a RAM preview of this so we can see a little bit better version of it. That's gonna go super slow, so let's do a half quality. My computer's creeping by today. I don't know what's going on. So as we move through here, jungle will slowly come into focus. Just think of it like a real camera. It's like you're doing your move, but you're not adjusting your focus at all. You're setting it, and you know when the ending point of your camera move, it'll be in focus, which is perfectly fine. I kind of want my camera right now moves past all my leaves, which I guess is fine. I mean, we could adjust those leaves and where they end up, but so that's one move. And right when it hits that end, we know that this is perfectly in focus. If we wanted to keep jungle in focus the whole time, how would we do that? Well, if I look at my top view and I look at where I'm animating here, oops, I want to bring up my transform properties because I want to see this position. I would keyframe my focal distance along with my position move here. So I would create just keyframes along with the start and the end of my move. I'm going to easy ease all this, by the way, so it's nice and smooth. Hitting F9 or function F9. If I zoom out, look at my camera, I know my ending point, it ends on it, which is good. I just need to set my beginning point, right? So let's go down to focal distance, and I want to line this up with where that text layer is, which is right here. So if you'll focus on this pink line throughout this move, it locks onto that now, right? It's not moving with it. So as I get closer, I'm kind of racking my focus along with it to stay focused right on my jungle text layer. So I'll go back to active camera. You probably can't see it too well because it's kind of hard to see the nuance of that. But if we cranked up the aperture a bunch, like if I did like crazy amount here, you'd really be able to tell that jungle does stay in focus no matter where in this animation we end, right? So kind of nice, kind of cool. we talked a little bit about how we get this camera to do that like wiggle effect. Well, I didn't want to get into expressions much, so we'll do that in the later weeks of how you kind of simulate more of a shoulder camera look. Um, it's you could technically animate it by hand using position, but it just gets it would be very difficult to do it well. Um, so that's one way of animating camera. Let's go talk about another way. We want to look at, let's see, let's just do a new comp here and we'll play with it. We've got this paper layer here. I'm going to flip this guy 90 degrees so it's more landscape for us, and I'm going to scale it up. So what we're going to try to do is like a camera move on a piece of paper, like some parchment. So I am going to copy and paste some just sample text here. Lorem ipsum. They have like a generator just for random text that I'm going to grab. So we'll do like 10 paragraph of text. Right, so we've got all this great text. I'll just grab a chunk of this. And we'll go back here, we'll go to create new text. And actually, let's not do that. Let's draw on our text layer. If you have your text layer selected and you click, you can type and it will work just fine. If you grab your text tool and you click and drag, it'll create a text box. And then we can paste all that text in there. So I'm going to decrease the text size of this to fill up this paper. I'm going to adjust the font so it's more of like handwriting. I don't know what that would be. It's taking its time. Okay, that looks fancy. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger here so it fills up a little bit better. And I'm gonna change my color. I'm going to grab this guy. I'm gonna pick the color from the background here. It's not gonna do that. We'll do a fill instead, see if that works better. We'll give it a fill effect. Man, my computer hates me today. We'll throw a fill effect on our text. I'm gonna grab my color picker and just pick the background, so we get our base color, and I'm just gonna drag it to a darker version of that. Because when you use a black pen, it may look black, but it's actually still pulling from the pigment of that paper, so it's a little bit better for something like that. So, okay, so we have text on a background, which is a paper texture. And actually, now that I see this, I'm actually going to adjust my text box a little bit and give it a little more pad on the top and bottom. Okay. So actually, in doing that, I may have scaled it. Did I scale it or did I adjust my text box? Let's bring up scale. Yeah, I did. So I adjusted, grabbing these corners, I actually adjusted the scale, which is not what I wanted to do. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to make these both 85 so it's still nice and uniform. I'm going to lock that back in. You have to click inside your text field here, and then you can grab these corners. Now I'm not adjusting scale. I'm adjusting the boundaries of my text box, which is what I wanted to do at the beginning. So, okay, so we've got our background parchment or paper texture. We've got a text layer on top of it. Let's turn on motion blur. Let's make both of those layers 3D, right? Now let's create a new camera. 35 millimeter is fine for now. We may do some adjusting after that, but now we're looking through our camera. So what we want to do like a sweeping shot with a lot of depth, focusing on some of this text, right? So let's zoom in. Let's truck in. I'm gonna bring this down to a quarter. My computer is just creeping today. I don't know if that'll work. Might have to do full. We're gonna get nice and close. And actually, we may lose some of our resolution here. So rather than getting super duper close, let's just make this text bigger. Let's make it like 140. Okay, that looks better. A little more high resolution. So let's set our camera up on the left side up here. I'm gonna kind of orbit the camera get like an angled view, right? And I'll use my track tool up here to kind of set it up into this corner. So this will be my starting point. So I'm going to arrow down, go to transform, create position and point of interest keyframes, and then I'll find my ending keyframe. I want it to orbit around back down this way, maybe. And I'll use my track to move my camera. Actually, I'm just gonna go to my unified. So I'm gonna left click is orbit for me. I'm gonna truck out, bring it down here, truck out maybe a little bit further. Okay, so what does that do? What does that move look like? Now we're too close here. You can see it. We get like way too close. If I go to my top, that's a decent starting point for my move. But if I look at my top and click my thing here, you can see that my target is looking past it, which is okay. I mean, I can grab my targets here and adjust them to be in line with here. That way it always sticks right along with the paper. But we get a little bit too close. If I click these guys, I can drag this out and get that more like circular motion. That might be a little bit too much, but let's see what that looks. So if it's kind of arcing around it like that, what does that look like? Nice slow. Okay, so that's one way to do it. It's kind of hard to tell, but you can get the gist of the motion. If I easy ease these guys, and I'll render it out just so you can see what it'll look like. Oops, see now at the beginning when we adjusted that, you can see it changed how we're looking here. So we need to adjust. I'll go to my orbit and I'll clean that beginning part up. So now that's what our camera move's going to do. And again, our ending spot's messed up, so we got to adjust. We don't want to show that black there. I think in the example I did, it stayed on this type of, it didn't orbit around like that. So I'm going to delete these, go forward in time, and I think I'm going to grab the unified tool. I'm going to middle click and move kind of down here to the bottom and truck in on the bottom. I may orbit around just a hair. If I do that, what does that move look like? Ooh, that's funky. Let's do this. Let's just delete. We're back at the beginning here. Let's start over. Let's get these guys in here. Let's find our new spot. Grab my track, kind of track to the bottom, and we'll truck in. And I'm going to orbit just to adjust that crop a little bit. I don't want to see the black over here, so. All right, what does that look like? That's better. Yeah, I kind of just wanted to scroll down the text like this, which is kind of cool. So if I bring this up, I will render this, and you can take a peek, see what it looks like. And rendering this in full is just going to take too long. Let's do half. You all saw it in class, but some people took off from class, so I just want to make sure that you guys see how this is going to look. So you get the idea. It's just going to kind of slowly sweep down through this text, which is fun. But we don't have any depth. We need to get our depth going, right? So you kind of see how this is going to play out, right? Kind of cool. Let's get our depth. Well, if we have our movement done, let's go to camera options. Depth of field is on, but there's just not much. I'm going to crank up my aperture. You can see everything now is out of focus. It's because our focal distance is wrong. So let's go to our top, and we need to set our focal distance in line with our paper. So we need to bring this guy down to be in line. You see our target right here. I'm just going to kind of put it in the middle of our target, kind of where this line, my target line, intersects with my paper, which is on this line. So kind of right in the middle there. So if I go back to my active camera, my focal point should be kind of right in the middle, right? Pretty cool. Pretty neat. Looks fairly realistic. I like it. Looks good. We could put a vignette on here and make it look really good. We haven't done masks. We'll do masks next week, and I'll show you guys how to do really cool vignettes. If you want a quick peek on that, here's one way to do it. If we go to new adjustment layer, an adjustment layer is something that affects every layer below it. So it'll affect all these layers, nothing above it though. We can create a new adjustment layer. We go up to our ellipse tool with our adjustment layer selected and double click it. It'll create a circle around that layer, which is cool. If we go to our curves effect, we can throw a curves effect on that layer. And see this mask down here. Again, we'll do this next week, so we're kind of getting into it early. If we go to subtract, well, actually, I'll leave it on add so you can see what it'll do it. If I take my curves and I bring this way down, it darkens it. If I change this to subtract, now we're starting this vignette look. And if I go to arrow down my mask and I bring my feather up, now we have this nice like vignetted look. I'm gonna bring this not quite so far down. But now we've got a kind of a cool vignetting edged animation, right? Pretty cool. So that's a big chunk of camera movement. Obviously, camera movement, there's a million different ways to do it. A lot of the times we'll even move a null object and parent a camera to the null object because it gives us a little bit more flexibility. We'll do that in the future. We'll talk about what that means. But I really just wanted to intro a few different ways to move a camera. The big thing is use two views, see how this camera is moving during this animation to see if it's exactly what you want, right? It gives you a much more clear view of exactly what's going on. And what you're watching when you're creating your keyframes in your camera view doesn't necessarily mean that's how your animation is going to look when you go back and look at it. So it's something that you might have to smooth out using these curved Bezier lines, stuff like that. There's a lot of extra tools here that you can use to really perfect exactly what you want to do. So when we get into more stuff with After Effects, more advanced stuff, we'll talk about maybe some more advanced camera movement, stuff like that. But for now, I would use easy ease on your movements. I would make sure that you got motion blur turned on for your the layers that it's moving around. Make sure your motion blur for your comp is turned on. And I think that you guys can make some pretty cool stuff. So look forward to seeing what you guys do for next week in class. And we will talk next week about masks and shape layer, different, not shape layers, different layer types and stuff like that. I think I gotta go back and look. My memory's horrible, but I know we're talking about masks. So appreciate it, guys. We'll see you next week.